Season 6 of The Walking Dead just kicked off with a veritable parade of walkers. Is everyone boned? I don't know.
I don't know either.
But what we do know is you've been clamoring for more Walking Dead differences, so we're headed back to Season 3 of the show to find all the differences between it and the comics.
But we'll be really honest here, guys. Season 1 and 2 covered only a handful of issues each, and the differences were fairly straightforward. Season 3 deviates further from the comics with the introduction of one of the most popular storylines from the series,
the prison,
and covers the most ground in the comics yet.
I'm Michael Truly.
And I'm Casey Redmond. So without further ado, and no restraint on spoilers,
what's the difference?
Season 3 of the show spans 4 volumes of the books, covering elements from Volume 3, Safety Behind Bars, Volume 4, The Heart's Desire, Volume 5, The Best Defense, and Volume 6, The Sorrowful Life.
Hosted by Ira Glass. There are a ton of minor narrative shifts from page to screen, but we couldn't get to them all before we started to chew each other's faces off. So these are the major differences that move the story even further away from its printed counterpart.
In the comic, it only takes a few days for them to find the prison after leaving the farm.
While on the show, it takes the gang about 8 months. The finale of Season 2 teased a hooded figure, but it's not until Season 3 that they introduce that major character that is iconic to both the page and screen. I'm talking about Michonne. On the show, Michonne saves Andrea in the woods, and they wander alone until they find a military helicopter and then head directly to Woodbury.
In the comics, it's under very different circumstances and much longer time before Michonne meets the governor. Comic Michonne arrives on the scene and saves Otis,
who is dead on the show.
She follows him to the prison where the rest of the gang is. She immediately recognizes Tyreese from his days playing football for the Falcons.
But on the show, Tyreese wasn't famous before the apocalypse?
Fans of show Michonne would be surprised to learn that the first thing she does after being introduced is flirt with Tyreese. And then shortly thereafter, she goes down, down, la-da-da-dee, slurpity slurp. This causes Carol, Tyreese's lover at the time, to slash her wrists in a failed suicide attempt. Carol survives, but it doesn't stop a relationship between Tyreese and Michonne.
Whoa, that is very different from the show.
Michonne often talks to herself or her dead boyfriend, which Andrea notices in the prison. This is the only significant interaction between her and Andrea in the comics.
So that entire Andrea-Michonne womance is completely for the cameras. Got it. Hey, more prison stuff. When the television cast gets to the prison, they have a pivotal, albeit brief, run-in with the inmates.
But in the comic, the prisoners, one in particular, play a much larger role. Comic Rick and the gang are shocked to find Dexter, Andrew, Axel, and Thomas not only still alive, but thriving behind the walls of the jail.
On the show, there were 5 prisoners and only Axel and Andrew from the comics are introduced. Andrew is more confident on the show while Axel is very similar to the book, though in the show, he's got that sweet mustache.
Book Axel manages to survive longer in the comic, and is a helpful yet reluctant ally to Rick and co.
This is pretty much his journey on TV, until he's shot by the governor mid-sentence in the episode Home.
In the comics, an unnamed Woodbury soldier kills him, and Patricia holds his dead body crying. Overall, the prisoners on the show were killed much more quickly than in the books. So, what about Dexter and Thomas, the 2 prisoners that never made it to TV?
They didn't make it to TV, so that's obviously different.
Thomas claimed he was a white-collar criminal, but is revealed as a violent sex offender who kills 2 of Herschel's daughters.
By this point in the show, there were only 2 of Herschel's daughters left anyway.
Rick blames Dexter, a known murderer, but then Thomas tries the murder again. He executes Thomas, proclaiming that the old system of justice is dead, and his new rule is if you kill, you die.
Which sounds very familiar to us watching the current season of the show.
This rule gets kinda tricky given what happens to Dexter. The show replaces Dexter, the prison's alpha male, with Tomas. No H, unlike the kid killer we just talked about. Yeah, I know, it's confusing. In both adaptations, Rick murders him after a zombie attack,
doing so to secure the prison from this violent rival.
In the comics, the morality of Rick's actions are more ambiguous. Dexter, who was in the prison first, simply demands that the survivors leave. Finders Keepers Rick, though, kills the loser Weeper to secure the prison for his family.
So at the end of the first episode, Seed, Herschel is searching for Glenn and Maggie after being separated while clearing the prison. He's bitten by a walker and has his leg amputated. In the comics, this loss of leg happens later, and differently, and also twice. 2 totally different people. who aren't Herschel.
Alan is the first to be bitten and have his legs sloppily amputated by Rick to prevent infection before he dies off-panel from blood loss, despite Herschel's efforts to save him. Later, when Laurie's in labor, Dale, who is still alive, is bitten on the leg by a zombie hiding under a car. He's taken back to the prison, his leg is amputated successfully, and Dale is saved. Hooray! This leads to a whole plotline not in the show, where Dale thinks Andrea is falling for Tyreese, but then he wakes up and Tyreese and Andrea have attached a wooden peg to his leg.
The show introduces its major villain for this arc pretty quickly. In the episode Walk With Me, we meet the governor. Andrea and Michonne see a helicopter crash but are forced to hide when a group of men arrive. Merle Dixon, Daryl's missing brother,
Who's not in the comics.
you're lost, comics. Merle is revealed to be part of the group. Andrea faints, and then she and Michonne are captured and taken to Woodbury. The governor tries to win over the two women, though Michonne remains wary.
This brings us to two huge differences. Andrea and the governor.
On TV, Andrea is adored to what's happening in Woodbury. She can't help but see the governor's flip-flop between savior and dictator as she attempts to buy into the governor's plan for the apocalypse.
In the comic, Andrea does not go anywhere near Woodbury. While Rick, Glenn, and Michonne suffer at the hands of the governor, Andrea is safely entrenched in her cell back at the prison. Andrea never sees Woodbury, she never meets, let alone bones the governor, and she definitely does not find herself tied to a chair, because that would be ridiculous. In the comics, Andrea starts sewing everyone's clothes, then becomes a surrogate mom to a pair of twins, Billy and Ben. She teaches other group members to shoot and prepares them to defend the prison. She also goes to a National Guard station with Tyreese to get more weapons.
Okay, let's get back to the big bad.
In the comic, the governor's hair is long and he's rocking that handlebar mustache. Oh yeah!
Yeah, but on the show, he's much more clean-cut.
In the comics, we don't see him until the issues with the inmates are resolved, the prison is cleaned out, and everyone feels a little secure. Rick, Glenn, and Michonne go out to investigate a crashed helicopter, which leads them to the town of Woodbury.
TV governor is a complex villain. He's lost his daughter, his home, and any sense of community or security he once had. Like Rick, he exists in a moral gray area with good sides and bad sides.
Well, until all he has are bad sides. Comic Governor shares the zombie daughter, but he is a being of vice and destruction. The very first thing he does is lead the group into an arena that they use for fighting. He mentions they feed the zombies outsiders that they find on their way into Woodbury. Oh, also he demands to know where Rick's camp is, and when Rick lies, the governor cuts off Rick's right hand.
Whoa! The right hand's his pointing at Carl hand.
Oh, no.
Michonne bites off the governor's ear, he locks Glenn in solitary confinement, and then tortures and rapes Michonne. While TV governor threatens to rape Maggie, comic governor actually rapes Michonne over and over again.
On the show, the governor makes a decision to destroy the prison and everyone in it. But in the comic, he simply intends to find the prison in order to raid it for supplies and take it over. On the show, we learn the governor's name is Philip Blake.
In the comics, we learn that his real name is Brian Blake, though they do call him Philip. Brian is actually Penny's uncle in the comic, and Philip is his dead younger brother. In the comics, the male Woodbury resident, Dr. Stevens, has a more considerable storyline. He treats Rick's hand and is the mouthpiece for most of the backstory on Woodbury.
In the episode Walk With Me, Dr. Stevens is a female doctor and only shows up in one other episode.
Caesar Martinez has a bigger role in the comic. Also, he wears a bandana. How fun! He's the guard who lets Rick, Glenn, and Michonne come into Woodbury. Later, when he sees the governor chop Rick's hand off, he helps Rick and his party escape back to the prison. Only he did this all at the behest of the governor, so that they could infiltrate the prison. You sneaky bastard. Rick runs him over with Dale's RV and then strangles him to death.
On the show, Caesar is one of the governor's lieutenants. He becomes a leader of a different group of survivors before being thrown into the biter pits and killed by the governor. Also, he wears a baseball cap and not a lame bandana. In the episode Killer Within, the two storylines split even more. On the show, Oscar and Axel gain the group's trust when they help shut off the zombie-luring prison alarm. Oscar leads Rick and Daryl to the generator room where Rick is ambushed by Andrew. Oscar gets Rick's gun and shoots Andrew, siding with Rick, whose group he and Axel want to join.
But only Axel joins them in the comic book.
Meanwhile, T-Dog is bitten while trying to close the gate-releasing walkers. T-Dog sacrifices himself to save Carol, whose head wrap falls off. Later, Daryl finds it, leading the group to assume she also was killed.
Since Daryl and T-Dog don't exist in the comic, none of that happens.
Carol isn't the badass we've come to love yet. When she's found alive, she's just kind of around, still trying to deal with life without her daughter and, find her bad self.
Unlike her paper counterpart, in the course of the story that takes place over the issues, comic Carol tries to commit suicide and fails, ignores her daughter Sophia, who is still alive by the way, kisses Rick, suggests a polyamorous marriage, and then suggests it to Lori when Rick says no. She's just a hot mess, like a real sloppy Joe.
On the show, Lori dies giving birth, and Carl shoots her so she doesn't come back as a walker. It's one of the most shocking and poignant moments from Season 3, and helped transition Carl out of childhood.
Lori survives childbirth in the comics, so later Rick uses Lori as motivation to survive when he's dealing with the governor. In the comics, Carl is still allowed some semblance of childhood, happily playing with his girlfriend, the still living Sophia. There's no weird ghost Lori from the show to haunt Rick, because very much alive Lori is kicking it at the prison.
In the episode Say the Word, we find out the governor has a hidden toothless zombified daughter named Penny. He feeds her body parts and likes to comb her hair because, say what you will, he's a good dad.
In the comics, she still has her teeth when we first meet her, as do the rest of the Woodbury zombies.
In the show, when Merle is in the arena, we learn about the Woodbury dental plan. Toothless zombies. It's like a bunch of old people giving you cheek kisses.
This comes later in the comics. We'll get to it, hang on a sec.
In Hounded, Rick has a hallucinatory conversation with Amy, Jim, Jackie, and eventually his own dead wife.
In the book, he hallucinates only about Lori, but not until much later.
On the show, Andrea and the governor begin an affair.
But in the comics, Andrea is still getting that sweet syrup from Grandpa Dale, but does eventually start up a relationship with someone else. Okay, huge this doesn't happen yet spoiler alert. It's Rick, but much, much, much later. We're not even gonna get there in this video, so don't ask me about it.
In the episode When the Dead Come Knocking, the governor forces Maggie to give him information about the prison by threatening to shoot Glenn.
But in the comic, like we said earlier, he lets survivors leave with Martinez so they can find out where the prison is.
In episode 8 of the season, Made to Suffer, we finally meet Tyreese and his sister Sasha, along with Alan, Ben, and Donna.
In the comics, we meet Tyreese with his daughter and her boyfriend way back before Herschel's farm. You remember that? We talked about this in both the last 2 episodes. Seriously! Insert shameless plug here. If you remember, in the comics, Alan and Donna were part of Rick's group in Atlanta, but they did die before this happened. Ben is a character first encountered in issue 2 of the comics and has a twin brother named Billy.
On the show, Alan wants to return to the prison on the side of the governor, but second guesses his choice when the governor turns on his own soldiers. Alan turns his gun on the governor, but the governor kills him before Alan can react. Tough luck, Alan.
As for Tyreese, Season 3 does not delve too deeply into his family. The biggest difference comes with the suicide pact that Tyrese's daughter Julie and Chris make. While Julie succeeds, Chris fails, and his subsequent death at Tyrese's hands in the comic Safety Behind Bars is one of the prison's most heart-wrenching sequences.
Obviously, the show lacks that heartfelt visual of Tyreese holding his daughter's corpse or killing a survived Chris in a fit of rage. Back on the show, while Rick goes into Woodbury to rescue Glenn and Maggie, Michonne kills Penny. The governor attacks Michonne, and in self-defense, she shivs him in the eye with a glass shard.
In the comic, Michonne does not kill Penny, but she sneaks her way to the governor's apartment and brutally tortures him. His right arm, fingernails, testicles, and his left eye, all gone. Just fleshy little patches left behind. Also in the comics, she pops his eye out with a spoon. It's gnarly, and the governor definitely deserves it.
In the episode Clear, Morgan Jones, the guy who originally saved Rick, finally makes a comeback.
This reunion doesn't come till after the whole storyline in the comics.
Also, Morgan doesn't want to join Rick because he can see that Rick is gearing up for a war. He doesn't stick around. Yet. In Welcome to the Tombs, the governor leads his army to the prison for a very unsuccessful assault. After Rick and the others ambush the governor's army, he flees the prison.
In the comics, they also retreat, so the governor attempts to enter with a hostage, but is unsuccessful.
On the show, the governor stabs Milton in the stomach, so he'll die and then come back as a zombie and eat Andrea alive. But Milton tells Andrea about some pliers behind her that can help her get out of the cuffs. He urges her to escape and stab him in the head, but she barely gets the cuffs off before dead Milton shreds into her neck. Andrea takes her own life with Rick's gun.
In the comics, Andrea survives the entire prison storyline and continues kicking ass. But for how long?
On the show, when the Woodbury army attempts to run away, the governor opens fire and murders them all.
In the comics, with tension rising, the governor's army kills the governor instead, and so much more happens.
But this battle scene is really more comparable to the mid-season finale of Season 4 than the little one that happens at the end of Season 3, so we'll save some more big differences for the next episode. We're sure we missed some things here and there, but that's definitely all the major changes. Let us know if you've spotted some more and share them in the comments below.
Now I bet you either want to catch up on the show or get around to finally reading the comics,
Playing that fun Walking Dead game that I got on my phone.
like this video if you want to see Season 4 on What's the Difference.
And make sure to subscribe to Cinefix for more awesome movie content.